Okay, hello everybody, Hirsch here again, and welcome to Java lesson episode 6, the final episode before we start making our awesome text-based game. So anyway, in this lesson, I'm going to finish the final types of loops, and then we'll start making our game, and then we'll go over how to use classes and methods, and we'll start going over more advanced and more detailed things after that, just in case you're wondering how the tutorials are going to be working. So anyway, for this tutorial we're going to create a new class. We'll just call it lesson 6, and so remember, always public static void main string args. Okay, so we have our main method here, and we also have the class. So right now we know about if loops, well, if statements really, and then we also know how to use else if and also just else. So that's essentially the format for a very standard if loop. But let's say we wanted to print out a number sequence. So like we wanted to print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How could we do that? Or we wanted to print out numbers up to a certain number. So let's create our scanner. So just import java.util.scanner, and we're just going to do scanner in equals new scanner stem.in. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create an integer num equals in.next int. Now, in case you didn't know, you can put everything in one line like this. It can make it a little bit more difficult to read, but you can put it in one line like that. I'll do it for this tutorial. Usually I prefer not to, but it's fine. Okay, so we now have int num, and what we want to do is we want to have the user input this number, and if I put in 10, I'd want the computer to print out all the numbers from 0 to 10. So we could do this with a lot of if statements. Well, we could say if num equals 10, print out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If num equals 11, print out... Okay, yeah, in case you're wondering, that's not going to work. So what's another solution? Well, we can do something called a while loop, or we can do a for loop. Now, what are these two things? Well, a while loop is essentially saying while something equals true, we do this. So system.out.print a. Okay, now this is where booleans from the previous tutorial are going to come in actually helpful, because we could say if boolean a were equal to true, do this, and then something could set it to false, and we could break out of the loop. So these are pretty simple, and they'll make sense once we use them. And this is generally useful if you don't know how many of something you're going to have to print out. But in this one, we know exactly how many numbers we have to print out. So what we can do is we can say for. And now, here's the format for a for loop. First of all, you set up a counter. So generally, standard form would be int I. Then you put in a semicolon. Now, you're going to say, well, I is less than num. And then you put in your operand, operator, whatever it's called. I believe it's the operator. Oh, okay. Sorry guys, I know I did it. So you have to set this equal to 0. You always have to set it equal to 0. Okay, so how does this work? Well, first of all, it creates a temporary integer I, and it sets it equal to 0. And it only creates that on the first time it runs the loop. Now also, this is a variable initialized inside the for loop. So it can only be accessed inside this loop. And once you get out, this variable gets destroyed. Well, okay, not really destroyed. They just disposed of it. But anyway, so you only have to worry about this variable while it's inside the loop. Now, the next part of it says I is less than num. this is the condition it tests for. So essentially it goes through, and if I is less than num, it will execute, and then when it finishes, it comes back and it does this, I plus plus. Now what does that do? That's essentially the same as saying I equals I plus 1. Now if you remember before, we used something, we used like a times equals 10, which was just a equals a times 10. This is essentially the same thing, except if you use plus plus, it just increments it by 1. So essentially, it'll set I to 0. It checks if I is less than the number we inputted, which is num. It goes through the loop, it comes back, it increments I, and then it checks it again. And it keeps doing that. So how would we do this? Now we can say system.out.print. Now what did we want to do? Well, we wanted to print out every single integer from I equaling 0, well, from 0 to whatever number we put in. So let's say print I. Now why? Because I is going to be equal to 0 the first time. And the second time it'll be equal to 1, then 2, then 3. So that's basically what we want. We want I. So let's put in 100. And oh my gosh, it printed out all the numbers from 1 to 100. And let's actually just make this print line so that it makes it a little bit neater. And as you can see, we have, wait, it only went up to 99? Why is that? Well, let's see. It goes through at 98. I is less than num, that is true. So it goes through and it does that, it creates 99. Now it checks if that's less than number, and yes, it is less than 100, so it goes through. It increments it by 1, it gets to 100. 100 is not less than num, so it doesn't go through, it finishes the loop at 99. So what is the solution? Well, instead of saying less than, we'll just say less than or equal to. So now if we run this and we put in 100, it will go all the way down to 100. And this is quite brilliant. So now that's basically how you use a for loop, and they're very useful when you know exactly how many of something you're going to print out. But let's say we don't know how many of something we're going to print out, so for that we're going to have to use a while loop. So let's say while, and let's just create another integer and we'll call it I, and we'll make it equal to 0. So we'll say while I is less than num, it's going to do this. And at the end we'll do I plus plus, so this increments it by itself, and we're going to do system.out.print I. Okay. Now if we do this and we set this to 100, it does, we should probably do print line again so we can actually see what's going on. Run it, and we put in 100, and it goes up to 99. And again, just like before, if we do less than or equal to num, it'll go to 100. So you may be wondering, you thought that I said that this was different. Well, it is. It has a different purpose. This is not generally how you would use a while loop, and the reason being, we created the integer I outside of while. The integer I is not going to get destroyed when while finishes, so therefore we are technically wasting memory space because we don't need this afterwards. So we might as well just use a for loop and create the int inside the loop and then just have it get destroyed afterwards. So, but there is another time where while is more efficient. So let's say if num equals 5, and let's just create a boolean a. So if num equals 5, a equals true, else a equals false. Okay, so let's change this again. Let's say while, and we can say while a equals true. Now, in most programming languages, not only can you say while a equals true, you could actually just say while a, and it will assume that you're saying while a is true, and that's essentially the general. You have to remember that the general assumption would be that a is true. So this is just saying while a is equal to true. I'll keep in the equals true for now, and as we progress, I'll start to take that out when I write it. But anyway, So we can say while a equals true, system.out.print a is true. Okay. Print line, actually. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to do num minus minus, and that essentially is the same thing. It just subtracts 1, though. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, or no, what we could say is we'll say, okay, well, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do num minus minus, and then we'll say if num is less than or equal to 0, then actually we'll just do, a equals false. Okay, so let's go through and look at what this does. So if number equals 5, a will equal true. Now if a is equal to true, it'll print this out, and then it'll subtract 1 from num, and then num will be, and then if num is less than 0, it'll turn a to false, and it'll stop executing. Now this may seem a little confusing in the moment, but it'll make more sense in a second. So let's just put in 10 for num, and it doesn't do anything because a was set to false. It doesn't bother executing this. Set this to 5, a is true, a is true, a is true, a is true, a is true. It prints it out 5 times. And that's essentially how you use a while loop. Now, I know I still haven't really given you a concrete example of how to use it, but I think you should now understand how to use it, and it'll become more obvious once we actually need one. Yeah, you'll probably get that. And also, the for loop is used very often. It's very useful. And though it may not seem like it, a for is actually used less than while, I think. But it's fine. So anyway, so in the next tutorial, we will be starting our text-based game, and hopefully that'll be a lot of fun. So subscribe if you guys want to see that. It'll be great. Leave a comment like always if you want any help or anything. I will try to help out everybody. And yeah, please subscribe if you want to see the next video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.